Hello and welcome to the 2023-24 League One predictions from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Craig Savage, and with me, as always, is Mr. Daniel Cody. If you haven't seen the League Two video above, please check that out. And we are going to predict the automatic promotion spots, the playoffs from third to sixth, and the bottom four who will be relegated to League Two. As a new thing for the Honest Football Podcast, we are going to be doing match day predictions for this League One season. It'll be on via YouTube Shorts and on TikTok. Right, let's start off with the bottom four. Let's go for 24th place in League One. So, Daniel Cody, who have you gone for and why?
In 24th, do you know what? I actually found the bottom of League One tougher than the top. I really did this year. The top 3 or 4 I was pretty certain on. I've got 8 teams that could go down from League One this year, and I've struggled to put them in the right order. And I know one of them is going to be different to yours because you've got a vendetta against a relatively local side. However, I've had to go for a team that I didn't want to. I actually instinctively think these guys might stay up, but I can't find a logical reason to put them up there. So I've got to go for Carlisle, I'm afraid, because look, they moved on their top scorer, Christian Dennis, and I know his role faded towards the end of the season. He didn't actually start in some of the playoff games, but there's still a lot of goals out of the team there. They've kind of stuck with their policy of adding generally younger players from the higher levels, which means there is an element of the unknown. And we saw with teams like Exeter, who were fancied to go down last year, they just flew into the league with momentum, which Carlisle might have. I like the addition of Sam Lavelle at the back. It's a good player, has played at this level for a while. And as I said, I do feel they might be all right, but they've not got proven League One quality, and they've not got a great number of goals left in the team, because after Dennis last year, the top scorer had 6, and they've not added a lot of attacking depth. So I'm a bit worried about them. I'm having to put them in my initial 4, but if I'm being honest, I feel it could be any 4 from the bottom 7 or 8 I've got.
24th place for me is Stevenage.
I am so surprised, Craig.
Pretends to be shocked. Yeah, obviously, Stevenage had a season to remember last season. They've got some late goals in them. That somehow I keep getting messages of Steve Evans celebrating for some random reason. That's highly annoying. But I can't see that happening this season. I think they might get a bit exploited. I know they've recruited okay.
They've let goal scorers go, though, which surprised me, to be honest.
But they're going to have to use Broad away as get the most points, because I can't see them getting many points away from home with that their tactics. So I'm going to go Stevenage to be 24. Right, 23rd place. Who have you gone for?
This is where I start to get probably pelters for this season, because I've gone for the team I put in the bottom 4 last year. They proved us all wrong, and I'm going to go for it again. But because they've lost loads of stars this summer, I've gone for Exeter, because I know they started well. They faded a bit towards the end of the season. They lost Josh Key to Swansea. They've lost Collins in midfield at Peterborough. I know it was for off the field reasons, but they've lost Giovanni Brown, who scored quite a few goals for them last season. And let's be honest, that is a spine of the team in terms of goals, creativity and solidity that they just haven't replaced so far. They have brought in Tom Carroll in midfield, who obviously Spurs fans will remember from yesteryear, but he's someone who could provide that important experience in the middle. The problem going to Exeter last year is basically, of the star performers, the only one who's left is Sam Nombe. Now, if he doesn't stay fit, or he doesn't score the same amount of goals as last year, I think he got 17 in total. But if he doesn't match that total this year, where are the goals coming from Exeter? And it's my problem with a lot of these teams I've got in this bottom 7 or 8, is I don't see where the goals come if one player isn't available. So if he scores 20 again, then fair enough, they might be fine. But for now, I have to go for Exeter because they've lost a lot more than they've gained so far.
23rd place for me is Cambridge United. They got away with it at the end of last season, survived on the final day. Joe Ironside's now gone.
Sam Smith as well went to Reading. He's their top scorer last year.
So I'm very worried on that. And where you allude on where's the goal scorers coming from, I really don't know where it's going to come from Cambridge point of view. To be fair, they're punching way above their weight in League One at the moment. So I'm glad they've had a couple of seasons in there. Unfortunately, I think it might be one season too many for them. 22nd place.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Cambridge. I haven't actually put them in my bottom 4, but they are one of the 4 or 5 teams I was battling with all morning about where to put them in these 2. But I've just kept them out in the end. In 22nd, this is probably the most surprising based on recent league tables, but I think you'll probably understand why. I've gone for Shrewsbury Town because they've lost Luke Leahy, who was their top scorer from defence last year, is ironically at the other end of the table going to be the perfect Joe Jacobson successor at Wickham. But Leahy going is a massive problem for Shrewsbury defensively and going forward. Pennington's gone from the defence as well. Most importantly, Steve Cottrell's gone, which I was really surprised about. And I know as Luton fans, we've got a soft spot for Matty Taylor, but his managerial career so far has not been, well, particularly convincing, I would say, so far. They have got Elliot Thorpe on loan from Luton, who obviously we'll keep an eye on, and knowing Kennate in that midfield as well. Carl Winchester came back after a loan spell, bit of stability, but generally they've gone for younger players. I don't see the goal scoring threat. Udo didn't have as good a season last year. And really, it's a combination of Leahy going and the managerial change. Of course, he could get sacked early. He could prove us wrong. But for me, I'm worried about them this year. So when I had 4 or 5 names to choose between, I just went for Shrewsbury in 22nd. I think losing Steve Cottrell's a big mistake.
22nd place for me is Cheltenham Town. Just a bit wide on them, to be fair. I know they signed Curtis Davis and Luton legend Curtis Davis, and that's a good solid signing, really. Like vastly experienced, but also he's going to miss the first game of the season because he's suspended.
Ridiculously.
Yeah, but I don't know what else is there to come from Cheltenham. And where I say with Cambridge is probably they've done well to solidify their place in League One. I think this could be the season where they might just have to fall back down into League Two. Right, who's got the final spot of relegation?
Honestly, this was so difficult for me. So obviously I've just ruled Cambridge out. I think Wigan will just get there despite having the points deductions. I had Northampton in the mix, but 22 goals from Sam Hoskins, I think they'll be all right. But the 2 I had left to choose between were Cheltenham Town, who you've obviously gone for in 22nd, and Port Vale for similar reasons, because Port Vale let in over 70 goals last year. Cheltenham only scored 45 and 20 of them were Alfie May, who's gone to Charlton. So they've only officially got 25 goals left in their team. I was basically just going between the fact that Port Vale have brought in solid midfielders in Jason Lowe, Connor Grant, etc. Good League One EFL players. Kofi Balmer, who Charlie has spent years talking about when we've been covering Northern Irish football, who's come on loan from Palace via Ballymena. But I've just opted for Cheltenham because I feel that the teams who can't score goals are the teams that are going to struggle more. And it's why Cambridge are going to be in that mix as well, in my opinion. But I was wrestling with it for the same reason you probably were. Curtis Davis comes in. Liam Smith's a good defender. They've got Southwood back in goal again. But you can't only score 45 goals in a season and lose 20 of them. So it's as simple as that for me. Cheltenham won't score enough goals. But if they get a good striker in on loan or on a free before the end of the window, I'd be going straight to Port Vale or Cambridge.
This could be the most open relegation battle I think we've ever predicted, to be fair. So
tough at the bottom, yeah.
It's very tough. 21st place for me is Fleetwood Town.
Oh, I had them just above that relegation, but I had them 16.
I feel they've got off the field problems at the moment.
True.
Obviously, the owner is obviously done some naughty things, which we won't allude to, which could actually have that effect, not just obviously off the field, but on the field. Obviously, a couple of loan set players from last season, they obviously went back. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure about Fleetwood. Right, let's move on to the playoffs, and we start in 6th place.
Again, pretty tricky. My top 5, I'm fairly confident in, but 6th, again, I was wrestling with a bit. One team I'm definitely not putting up there this year is Barnsley, because for off the field reasons, again, I don't think they're going to be near, and they've struggled a bit. And obviously, we've nicked their captain, which doesn't particularly help them.
We always take Barnsley players.
You'll be pleased to know I'm not putting Stevenage in the top 6, so not too much bias on that front. There's a couple of teams again that have impressed me. I think Oxford will be in the outsiders for that list. Bristol Rovers, if they can sort out their defence, will be as well. But just missing out, I'm probably going to get pelters for this. Wickham in 8th, Portsmouth missing out in 7th, and at the expense of Peterborough, because they always find a way. Now, I know this at the moment and the time of recording, I haven't time-stamped it yet, 26th of July looks potentially silly, because Johnson Clark Harris is still transfer listed. He's been stripped of the captaincy. He's probably going to be on his way. but they've always got goals in their team and they always find a gem. They've also lost Jack Taylor to Ipswich. They've lost Joe Ward, Frankie Kent. There's a few players on their way out there. And of course, they've got to bounce back from that ridiculous playoff heartbreak, losing 5-1 in the second leg, the biggest comeback of all time. We were all talking about them in the final after the first leg. Another former Luton man has turned up, though. Peter Kioso, if he can stay fit, will be a good player for them at fullback. Did well at championship level for us when he got his chance. And it's just about whether Shimanga can start finding the goal, whether the new skipper Mason Clark can be a threat. But the only worry for me is goals, because Jack Marriott's not the most reliable physically, nor is Ricky J. Jones. So goals are concerned, but Peterborough will sign players. And by the end of the year, you have to put them in the top 6. Peterborough never miss out.
You're criticising Ricky J. Jones, you feeling right?
I'm criticising his hamstrings, unfortunately.
Well, they're probably like mine. 6th place for me is Portsmouth.
They were the two I were between, so I don't blame you.
It was tough ones. Like, been a bit, last couple of seasons, a bit disappointing for their standards, and they need to strike gold at some point. You can't keep being mid-table Portsmouth. But then again, League One has been very tough the last couple of years, and
it's more open this year, isn't it?
I think it's a bit more open this year, but there are better teams out there at the moment. So it could be a big coup for John Mousinho with his young coaching career to get a promotion, like a Stephen Schumacher, like a Rob Edwards. He's got a bit of time in him. He had a bit of time, obviously, at the middle of last season. Now he's got the summer in him. Let's hope he can recruit well. 5th,
I've gone steady. I've gone for the return in Neil Critchley at Blackpool. I just feel it's a match that works. The reason I haven't put them higher, and I would have done at the start of the summer, is they've lost a lot more of their star players than I thought they would, to be honest, from his previous stint. We have seen good League One players added already. And of course, Critchley, I know he had that disaster at QPR, but I think Blackpool suits him well. And I'm glad that the board have gone back to him as well, because it's the right move for the club. But they've lost so much creativity, which is the worry. Keshi Anderson's just been unveiled at Birmingham. Josh Bowler's obviously gone again after his loan back. And Jerry Yates
is gone.
Yeah, that's it. The goals are going to be a miss there in the Championship. The thing for me is, I know they haven't got a lot of depth up front at the moment, but the first season in the Championship, Shane Lavery was a real threat. Couldn't really stay fit and consistent last year. So I wonder if the step down to League One will actually be a big one for him. They've still got the likes of CJ Hamilton, who we know can be a threat on the counter too. So when I look at how open League One is, I'd be surprised if Critchley and Blackpool don't get to the playoffs. What position they'll be in could be wrong, but for me, I look at the rest of the league and think they've still got enough for the top 6, and they'll probably add 2 or 3 more as well.
5th place for me is Reading, mainly because I can see them doing well, but be hit with points deduction randomly for some stupid reason. And Ruben Sellers in charge. Obviously, he was at Southampton in the Premier League.
That's the bit that worries me.
That's a bit dodgy in a way, but I can't see them being winners this season. Ruben Sellers has got a bit of pressure on him now, because you can't just go from Premier League. All right, he was a temporary manager, to be a League One boss like that and not deliver. Bit of pressure on him this season, Ruben Sellers. Marked your stamp early. So, but yeah, I'm going to go for them to even still Reading to make the playoffs.
4th place is I've probably got a fairly obvious top 3. I think I've actually gone for the 3 bookies' favourites in the top 3. But 4th is my dark horse of the season, because it's another team that's had a poor couple of years, but I really like what they've done this summer. And that team probably won't surprise you, and I think you might have them in there as well, is Charlton Athletic. Because they've had, poor seasons. They've not been in the playoffs, as you mentioned, in a very tough League One. But we saw Harry Eisted, another man we know from Luton, who was terrific for Barnsley. I mean, that playoff final, he deserved to be on the winning side, quite frankly. He was remarkable for them second half of the year. Kept Collins out of the team, who's a very good keeper at that level. And now Charlton have managed to nick him from Barnsley with some of the stuff going on off the pitch there. So I think that's a really good coup for them at the back. Then we mentioned the other end. We talked about Cheltenham at the bottom, both of us. They've lost half of their goals from Alfie May to Charlton. And if Charlton can take advantage and find a service to him, you've basically added one of the best goalkeepers from League One last year and one of the top strikers from League One. Both ends of the pitch, they've improved. You've got to give them that. The only thing for them is if they could tempt Raksaki back on loan again, because he got 15 last year and he looked terrific. If they could get him back for the creative spark as well, I genuinely think they'll be one of the most frightening teams in the division. I was tempted to put them higher, but I've stuck with Charlton in fourth. But I'm almost certain they'll be in the top six.
Fourth place for me, a team's already been mentioned, is Peterborough, just because Peterborough do what Peterborough do.
Always there.
Like Wickham were a couple of years ago, just make playoffs. I'm going to go for Peterborough, as you alluded to. They have to. I think another team that needs to somehow grow confidence after that second leg defeat, because that was an absolute joke. But Darren Ferguson in charge again and again and again. He always finds a way to get teams working. It just suits him perfectly. So, yeah, that's why I've gone for Peterborough in the top four. The final playoff spot.
Another team that's already been mentioned. I've gone for Reading just because their transfer embargo's finally lifted after God knows how long. They've got a manager in place. It looked like it was going to be Chris Wilder in May, if anyone remembers that far back, and then it changed and Ruben Sellers came in. I think that might be a good decision come the end of it. Certainly will help their wage bill, I would imagine. Obviously, the big problem is they've been losing a lot of big earners and a lot of the experienced players where they've only been able to sign frees on short-term deals and loan players and whatever else. We know we're going to see a younger squad this year. I'm quite impressed with the work they have done. They haven't gone for big names or whatever. They brought Sam Smith back to the club, a former youth player who was obviously top scorer at Cambridge last year. Lewis Wing's a solid League One operator. Charlie Savage, Robbie's son from Manchester United's academy. But the problem is at the moment, their squad's still quite small. I would imagine we're going to see probably 6 to 8 players coming at least before the end of the window. Probably a couple of loan players as well. But they've got a good core of players left still. They've got off most of those big earners from the books. But again, I'm kind of taking a gamble on what's going to happen by the end of the month. But like you, when you look at the table and the teams in there overall, it's very hard, even with the players they've got at the minute, to get them outside the top six. It's just Ruben Sellers that is the unknown quantity to an extent.
So my third place is a team that's also been mentioned in the playoffs. So 3 out of the 4 teams have been mentioned by both of us, and my third place is Blackpool. As you said, Critchley's back in charge. Obviously needs to rebuild that team again, as you said earlier. A lot of players gone, which is obviously understandable. But it's having like a Nathan Jones back at your club in that solid way. Knows the club, knows what you can get the best out of certain players. If you can recruit to make them a little bit better, got a bit of money because obviously certain players obviously departed. They can really rebuild and have Bloomfield Road be that fortress again, because Bloomfield Road is a tough place to go to.
Yeah.
A lot of teams did struggle in the Championship last 2 seasons, so we found it really tough to get those victories at Bloomfield Road. So I can see them doing really well again. So definitely in the top 3 for me. Right, so let's look at the playoffs, and you've got Reading versus Peterborough and Charlton versus Blackpool.
Oh, this is tricky. Reading beat Peterborough. Charlton v Blackpool is so tough because you don't know what they're going to have by the end of the window. I'm going for Charlton because do you know what? I was so tempted all morning to find a reason to chuck them up into third or second. So I'm going to say Charlton are going to get to the playoff final and they're going to beat Reading in a classic. Let's hope it's like the Charlton late 90s playoff final, shall we?
Well, we do know last time Charlton were in the playoff final, and it wasn't obviously the 4, it was that late winner against Sunderland.
Yep.
So my one was mine's Blackpool v Portsmouth and Peterborough v Reading. I think Blackpool and Reading will go through. I'm gonna go Blackpool to nick it.
So you've got a team bouncing back from the Championship. I don't.
But either way, one of them's got to bounce back. Right, let's move on to the top 2. I think I'm gonna have to guess what your top 2 is.
I think it might be the same as yours.
So let's start with your second place.
I'm going to bank on our top 2 being the same and in the same order, because in second place, I have gone for Bolton Wanderers. Now,
okay.
I've gone for them for a couple of reasons. They've definitely strengthened again this summer overall. There's no doubt in that. They've added strong additions in goal, which was obviously the worrisome area following James Trafford's zone. And Nathan Baxter's played Championship football. They've got experience in there with Coleman as well, Joel Coleman. So 2 good EFL keepers. Carlos Mendes Gomez, we know from Luton, a good creative player, has done well in the lower echelons of the EFL before. Dan and Lindeloo from Southampton, I think, is a really interesting signing and will add some firepower. I think he's actually featuring on the thumbnail, if I remember rightly. But they've got bundles of potential going forward. They've not lost much, which is something we haven't said about a lot of the other teams below. They've not lost much from last season in terms of their out-and-out quality. They've not lost most of their goal threats from last year. They have players in double figures. Dion Charles will be looking to have another good season. So I just think things are looking good for them. They've got goals everywhere. They've got creativity. They've sorted the problem area, which is goalkeeper, and defensively they were quite solid all season. So if they can avoid the famous Ian Everett slow start, I think they'll get in the top two this year. And look, there's no denying it. With the three teams that have come up versus the three that have come down, particularly with Wigan's points deductions, the top end is not as strong as it was last year. So a lot of teams will see this as an opportunity, a bit like us in the Championship last year. It is an opportunity to get up. So for me, Bolton will take it in second place.
My second place is also Bolton. You said everything. They do look like they've strengthened really well, as you said. To be fair, they were quite unlucky in that. They were also unlucky in that playoff semi-final as well. Didn't do enough for me, but they were unlucky. But yeah, Bolton for me, I think it's their time to go back up into the Championship. And the first place, I think we both said I think we got the same first place. So let's have it.
Yeah, you've disappointed me not putting Charlton in your top six, but Derby County are my champions. I don't see an alternative to it. When I look at the squads on paper, the only concern for me is that they lost David McGoldrick, who obviously scored 24 goals last year. But between Collins maybe adding a few more and Connor Washington coming in, I think they can probably make those goals up. They've added good experienced defenders, the likes of Elder and Wilson as the fullbacks, for example, being two of them. And they've added brutality and physicality at centre half. They still had a little bit of a hangover of that young side in certain areas from the points deductions and the relegation 2 years ago. But in Curtis Nelson and Sonny Bradley, you're probably not going to play the highest defensive line in the world, but you've got strong characters, strong footballers. And in Sonny Bradley, we know very well you've got one hell of a leader in a dressing room, which with people like him and Collins, they're the characters you need in a club. Another big loss is Jason Knight in the middle, which is a concern, but with the experience of Horahan and with 2 or 3 of those young stars from years gone by still there, when you look at the teams on paper, you can't look past Derby. Whether or not they go on and win the league is a very different question, but they've signed well, they've got a good squad, and I think we've both probably put them there for very similar reasons.
Yeah, and I trust the manager and Paul Warne.
It's done it so many times.
So many times with Rotherham. It was a bit disappointing how they pretty much collapsed. They lost some really silly games near the end of last season, Derby.
But they should have been in the playoffs. It
They
was
should
that
have,
stupid decision on the final day, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, but it was games before that as well where they should really have been comfortable in that playoffs and they didn't. Obviously, Barnsley went on that good run and got back into the playoffs, and Peterborough had a good run near the end and just scraped in. So it was disappointing on that point of view. But I think that Paul Warne's definitely learned his lessons. Obviously, they have recruited well, as you said. Sonny Bradley, I think it will be instrumental for them, and not just on the pitch, but off the pitch. You might as well get Andrew Shinney in, and then you've got your spine of the team. But yeah, I'm looking forward to what Derby have next season. So, yeah, we both. There's no reason why we both pick the same team because I'm not saying it's obvious, but they're the strongest team out there, in my opinion. Right, let's have a quick recap what we have predicted for the League One in 23-24 season. At the bottom of the table in 24th place for Daniel Cody, it is Carlisle United, 23rd Exeter, 22nd Shrewsbury, and 21st Cheltenham Town. For me, bottom of the pile is Stevenage, 23rd Cambridge, 22nd Cheltenham, and 21st Fleetwood. In the playoffs for Daniel Cody, 6th is Peterborough, Blackpool in 5th, Charlton in 4th, Reading in 3rd, with Charlton Athletic being promoted via the playoffs. For me, 6th for Portsmouth, Reading 5th, Peterborough 4th, and Blackpool 3rd, with Blackpool returning to the Championship. And our the top 2 is what we both picked the same: Bolton in 2nd and Derby as our champions. And those are predictions for League One in 23-24 season. Do you agree with us or disagree with us? Let us know in the comments and give us your predictions on the automatic promotion, playoffs, and relegation zone. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Honest Football Podcast, and you can follow us on all the socials. We're on all of them right now. And we'll see you next time.